My name is Bahir, and I work for Cloud Appers. We do web development, mobile development, and social media. Today, I'm going to talk about prototyping. Who here knows what prototyping means? Can you tell me what does it mean in the way you understand it?
Prototyping is when you want to start a software, so you build, it's like a prova, let me say, for your software. So you build your software, but in short.
Exactly. In technical terms, prototyping sometimes means building a wireframe of the application. I mean, that's one way to do it, but the working prototype is the best way to do it. So let's start from the beginning. I mean, everyone gets ideas, right? I mean, and some people, they value their ideas too much, especially people that they haven't been down the entrepreneurship path. Once you execute your first idea and get it out there, you'll see that it doesn't mean much. What really matters is the execution. And so, I mean, this is something that all of us need to understand. And I've learned that the hard way. I mean, I've fallen in love in many of my ideas, and I was devastated when they didn't work out. So ideas are worthless, and they come and go. And don't feel bad about any idea. That someone else does it, or you fail to do it, or someone competes with you and does it. There's always more ideas, and the whole global the scene is changing very fast. So there's a new idea every day now. The idea of prototyping is to test your idea quickly. Sorry? So yeah, the purpose of prototyping is to test the idea very quickly. So the first rule of prototyping, it should be quick. How quick? How quick the prototype should be. This is from my own learnings. It's not like there's no science, there's no rules, there's nothing. It's just because of how things are changing, how fast things are changing. I think that the prototype shouldn't take more than a month. And if it takes more than a month, it's like a project. It's a full-blown project. It requires planning, management, and that's a whole big mess. Ideally, it should take 2-3 weeks. And that includes everything. That includes creating the specs. That includes working on the wireframe, doing the design, and then the development. And at the end of this time frame, the prototype should be out in users' hands. 3 weeks. 2 to 3 weeks. You could prototype ideas in less than that. And I've done it personally. It's not big ideas, it's mostly hack projects, but it can be done. I don't know. I've been involved in an experiment about 2.5 years ago with a company that used to be in Dubai. They're called Spinbits. We did an experiment called Zero to Beta. We got together in a couple of days. I think it was on Wednesday. So Wednesday, Thursday, we launched on Friday. We decided to get together and just pick an idea and work on it. We had prepared some ideas, each of us. So we allocated times. We allocated a couple of hours to select the ideas, pick one, and then the rest of the time to work on the idea, develop it, design it, and release it. That was an eye-opening experience for me. I've been always a proponent of prototyping, but that was the first time that I've really experienced it in an intense way. And at that time, I live blogged the whole experience. The idea belonged to someone called Rida Barazi. I don't know if anyone is familiar with him. He's now in Canada. So he loved his idea, and there was one particular feature that he really valued. And towards the end of the experiment, this feature wasn't working. So we had a big discussion and a heated argument on dropping this feature, and we dropped it. I mean, it changed the whole product, but it worked. And we released the product, and within the first, after 24 hours of releasing the application, I think we got 350 users. And we didn't do any marketing. We just tweeted about it and blogged about it. And at the end of this experience, he realized that, I mean, it's working. I mean, the product didn't break. The idea, it's still there. It has, I mean, it has evolved into something else, but it's still there. And this whole, the results of this whole intense experience and limitation is really what shaped the idea. And this is something that most people also, they find that as an obstacle, this limitations in times, resources, whether it's developers, designers. They see that if we have all the time in the world and if we have great developers and many of them, we can get something done very quickly and, very in a perfect way. But that isn't the case. There are so many projects that fail because they're too big, because there's too many people and there's like, and there's no limit on the features and the ideas that you can squeeze in this project. So you end up doing everything, and that doesn't work out because users, they want something to use. So the prototype purpose is to create something called the minimum viable product, which is, come up with the core value of what the idea is about. So for example, Twitter is about microblogging. It's about posting short messages, and people can read that. That's it. And they prototyped Twitter was a side project. They prototyped it over a few days. And when they showed it to each other, they loved the idea. They decided to focus more on it and dedicate more time. And it ended up being one of the biggest companies and the most, with the most impact. And most of the most successful and big Google projects, they're also prototypes, a result of prototypes, whether it's Gmail, Google Maps, Google Wave, which failed. I mean, sometimes they fail. That's the unfortunate side of prototypes. But that's also fortunate. Because, I mean, you would want to know which idea is the successful one, which idea is the failure. And you can't know that from the idea. I mean, the idea, when you read it, it might be the best one. But when you actually create it, when you actually get it out there, I mean, people don't like it. People don't use it for different reasons, whether it's the idea or it's the execution. But at least you tried it and you learn from this experience. It's about also learning. And this is something that we really need in this region because we don't have, we barely have people with track records. So, we're trying to learn all of us at the same time. So we can't spend months on each idea. We're already late. So we need to be quick and we need to be fast. That means we need to prototype more. Whether it's a weekend like the Yalla Startup, the Yalla Startup Weekend that they did in Lebanon. That was a perfect example of the whole prototyping. But we shouldn't wait for events to do that. We should do that in our own time. Most of you are either developers or involved with developers. If you're a developer yourself, try to do that over a weekend, or try to take 2 days and do that. We did that in my company about 2 weeks ago. But we had too many projects and we couldn't focus on the idea, so it's still there. We haven't done it yet. But my point is, or if you're not a developer, you could partner with a developer because the idea requires design, requires wireframes, requires someone on the product side, not only on the development side to go write the code. So you can partner with a developer to work on this idea and release it. And I've met many of you that are sitting here in this hall, and they have ideas and they believe in their ideas. And they want to get their ideas out. So what I say to you is prototype the idea. Prototype it in less than 1 month. Get it out there. Even if it's not a mass idea, at least get it out to a few of the core users, and just see what they think. Is it worth it? Do they find it valuable? What's their feedback? And then see what will you do. If it's successful, you can iterate on it. You can or you can change the whole idea, and that happens. That happens a lot. Most of the ideas, when you start with it, for example, the idea that I told you about zero to beta, the experiment, we started with something and we ended up with something totally different, but it worked out. The most important thing is to create something that people use. It's not about the idea. And you can't find that out unless you actually start. I mean, when it comes to the development side, there's certain frameworks that allows you to build to build applications quickly. It's important to use these things. I mean, for example, Ruby on Rails, or Django on Python, or PHP frameworks, Zend or Cake PHP. There's, I mean, sometimes it's hard to prototype ideas with Java or .NET. I mean, no offense to those languages, but they're not built in a way that you could create something quickly out of them. I mean, some projects, they might be better suited for Java, but at least prototype them in those languages. Because also, other thing I forgot to mention is that most probably you're going to throw away this prototype once it's done. If not exactly once you've finished it, at least a few months down the line, because by that time you'll find out that there's so many things you want to change, there's so many limitations that you didn't foresee, there's a need for scalability that's not there in the core code, so you would want to learn from that and just scrap it and start with a clean slate, maybe with a different framework, maybe in a different mindset. So it's not something that necessarily has to be the actual product later on. It's a learning experience on the language, on the choice, on the design, on the wireframe, on everything. The two most important rules when it comes to prototype is two things. First, put limitations first on, even before you begin with the idea. Decide that you want to launch this in a week's time, in 2 weeks' time. I mean, that doesn't have to be arbitrary. I mean, you could, most of you are developers, so you could evaluate, okay, this will take a few days, this will take a week, but don't give yourself more time. And don't ever extend this timeline. Even if you have to, I mean, at the end of that time, if you haven't reached something, either scrap it or just launch whatever you've done. Don't extend the timeline, because once you open this window, it doesn't end. You'll see that it extends to weeks or months, and you'll find yourself that you wasted your time on something that doesn't work. So the most important part is stick to your initial timeline and be ruthless with the execution and with the idea. Like, for example, you have to pick two roles in this, the idea owner role and the executioner role. Once you've done with the ideation phase, you put down your ideas, the specs, you try to separate yourself from this, try to detach yourself from your idea and focus on the execution and see how you can get something done in this timeline, even if that means changing the idea or just scrapping half of the features. You don't need to stick to the original plan. That's the plan. That there is no plan in those prototypes. It's mainly about infusing the hacker culture in your projects. And this is why Facebook is one of the most successful companies, because the whole hacker culture, they embed that in their rules and in their guidelines and in their processes. They have that. They allow, for example, they allow their developers to come up with ideas, develop them, and deploy them for a selected number of users without any permission from the superiors. And they have certain metrics, and they have certain metrics on the network and metrics on the usage patterns. And based on that, they decide whether it's successful to deploy. They have, like, I think 7 levels, deployment levels. And once it passes those levels, they roll it out to the complete array of users. And that's why they're always rolling out features. Sometimes we don't even notice, like a change in a small button. Some of us notice that, some of us miss to notice that. That's because they're always adding stuff, and they're treating each feature as a prototype with one developer or a small team of developers working on that. That's why they're always coming up with new things and new ideas. And I'm sure that, I mean, behind the scenes, what most of us don't realize is that they're killing hundreds of ideas, and they're wasting hundreds of thousands of development hours. But that means that they're getting those ideas out of the way, and the people that are involved in those ideas, they're learning from the result of their ideas, and that will lead later on to better ideas from those people. So it's a win-win situation. I mean, the developers don't lose, even if their ideas don't make it. I think I'm done here. So if someone has any question.
Yeah. You were talking about using some languages to make a prototype quickly.
What do you mean by pattern?
Pattern, the way of making prototype. Forget about landing.
You don't, okay, yeah, there is, I mean, the way that we did it, like in the 0 to beta, we had 1 hour to flesh out the specs. What I mean by technical specifications, which means description of how the product should work. For example, Twitter, the specs would be allow each user to have a profile with the bio and with the profile picture. Allow them to post less than 140 characters each at a time, and define, like, for example, which location is that posted from, to describe the details of the service. This is part 1, the specs. Part 2 is the wireframe, which is drawing how do you think the product should look. Like that, you'll draw the header, you'll draw the menu. What are the links in the menu? You'll draw what each screen should include, and how the flow works between those screens. Like this is the landing page, and then this is the registration. This is the main page. This is the profile page. You'll draw them, and then you'll stick them somewhere on a wall and just draw the arrows between them to see how the flow works. And the next step is to work on the design. Take those wireframes. Either if you're a designer, you could design them. If you're not, you could send them to a designer who would take those like just drawings and empty boxes and add some life to them. Colors, fonts, different shapes. And the usability matters here. So but the usability, you could take care of it in the wireframe part. How to place, where to place each component, how the links should look. And then after the design is done, you start with the coding part, which is the actual prototyping. Does that answer your question?
Did you give an example of Facebook? Because actually, on the other hand, I'm a Facebook application developer, and you face the problems that they do change a lot.
That's, you know, it's, I mean, I meant what I said from the Facebook perspective, but I mean, I develop application on Facebook. And just 1 week back, I don't know if we have any Facebook developers, they added support for HTTPS, and that broke all of the applications. So I released an application, and then the client came back shouting at me that the application doesn't work, and we only knew about that 3 days after the actual change. That happens. I mean, this is a problem with their communication to the developers. It is. I mean, if they announce that a couple of weeks before they do that, it's not a problem, because I mean, on the user interface, nobody gets hurt. Like when they change the shape of the button and when they add a menu, right? You get used to it. But because they have a community of developers and they didn't inform that, I mean, it's a communication issue. And I'm sure that they realize that they need to work on that. I don't think it's a problem with prototyping. It's a problem with their communication. I mean, later on, once you have a service up and running, you definitely can't do changes out of the blue, especially if you have people working on those components. That's why, I mean, and on Facebook, like I told you, to avoid these things, I mean, apart from their APIs, when it comes to the users, they rolled that out to 7 layers. I think one developer from Facebook, he wrote about their process. So he said there's 7 deployment levels, and each level exposed that to a certain number of users. So once they passed that, so there's 7 levels before they found out that if things are working out for this future or not. Any other question? Who here is thinking of prototyping something? Only one? Oh, you're already prototyping something. How long are you giving yourself? That's too long. You know, I mean, I'm sure that some ideas, they take 3 months, but if you, like, hypothetically, if you just sit down and decide we want to do it in 1 month, wouldn't you be able to come up with something more minimal than what you already have? You haven't finished. How long have you been doing it?
More than, but we are not completely
That's a problem that I'm already facing as well. But that's why it's good to, I mean, if you can prototype this idea in a weekend, maybe take the 1 day off, 3-4 days, it's best than to like let it just like stale there. And this is also another part. I mean, we're most passionate about the ideas that we get the moment that we get them. And the longer that we wait on the idea, we lose the passion. It's not like we lose it. It's like we get we get other ideas that are more relevant and we're more passionate about. So by the time that we're done with the first idea, we don't feel anything strongly about it. We feel strong about something else. So we say, I mean, I should have worked on this rather than that. So that's why it's always better to prototype very quickly, while you still have the passion and the drive. And once you roll it out to the first users, you'll see whether it's worth investing in more or not.
We in 2B Labs actually are using minimum viable product strategy, and we in the last 2 months launched two products. The first one, the first Arabic URL shortener. It took 3 weeks. We launched it for private beta testers for 1 week and get the feedback. Then we launched another one called Barretly in just 1 week.
That's great. Did you give yourself limitations from the beginning, or you just?
No, we had the plan to launch in just 1 week.
Okay, yeah. That's exactly how it should work. And that's why you should put limitations on time and resources as well. Like decide whether you're going to involve 1 developer, 1 designer, 2 developers, 1 designer, depending on the idea and the time that you give yourself. I mean, I love Drupal and we've used it, but apart from Drupal, it's always best to use whatever tools available and build on them. It's more of a hacking rather than development. And the people that, hacking, I don't mean hacking by penetrating networks. What I mean by hacking is don't write code from scratch. Just find things that are already there. Drupal, for example, WordPress. Yeah. But it depends on the idea. Some ideas, you might want to do them from scratch. But yeah, if Drupal works, if WordPress works, if Joomla works, it's always best. And later on, once you have funding, for example, you want to roll that out to a bigger number of users, you can build it from scratch, you can hire a big team of developers. But for the initial idea, because you would want to save time and resources, use whatever tools are available. And the research part here is very important, to research whatever tools are available and which tools suits the idea best, the product. Okay. Thanks, everyone.